Great to see everybody here today. Welcome to our esteemed panelists. We're delighted to have you here. As Matt said, we're going to be spending a little bit of time talking about my personal favorite topic, which is health AI. I think this is an area where when we talk about AI for good, the first thing that comes to mind is the amazing innovation that's happening in the health space. So we have some experts here today who are going to share their perspectives on this topic, and I'd like to start with the concept of patient-centered care. I think this is a term that we've all heard, we're all familiar with. It's very much in the zeitgeist when it comes to clinical research, government, and industry in the health space. So when we think about this notion of patient-centered care, what does that mean to you? And from where you sit, how is AI enabling patient-centered care? Why don't we start with you, Mohammed?
Sure. We could probably spend the entire session on this, but I'm going to kind of go back to basics around what is patient-centered care. It's about the patient, right? But it becomes complicated because as a patient, I'm going to notice, for example, the left side of my face is drooping, right? I know how I feel. It doesn't feel right. Something's wrong. But then there's the mechanics around why the left side of my face is drooping. What are the mechanics? Well, maybe there's a certain part of the brain that's being affected that's causing that droop. Well, what's being affected? Is it the blood flow? Is it a clot? Maybe it's a bleed. What are the mechanics around the bleed? What do I do about it? The mechanics part is what a lot of people, general public, don't really have expertise in. That's why we have clinicians, right? So clinicians are trained in understanding the mechanics. They're also supposed to be trained on how patients feel, but that's really tough. So that should be fairly straightforward. Patient feels, they need to feel better. We understand mechanics. Then why do we struggle so much? So why is it that some patients don't do so well, others do? For example, if we look at something like asthma, how many people have friends or family who have asthma? A lot of people, right? How do we diagnose asthma? If there's wheezing on exhalation, if there's tightness in the chest, there's all sorts of symptoms, right? Yet seasoned clinicians, we will get it wrong about a third of the time. We will misdiagnose patients with asthma. Why? A lot of this is about variance, and it's about not doing the right tests or the assessments because there's a lot that needs to be done, and there's a lot of data that comes into our heads to think about a diagnosis. So from a statistical perspective, patients are different. When we make decisions clinically, we're thinking, okay, so for this patient, the latest randomized trial says X, or this evidence says Y. This is my information base. That's going to help me make decisions. But when you report on these studies, you're looking at the average, right? The mean. This is what 1,000 patients worth of data says. This is what the average person reacts. When I'm looking at the patient in the clinic in front of me, they may not be the average. Chances are they're not. So what is that variance like, and how am I going to tailor all of this information to that patient? Current evidence-based medicine says we look at randomized trials, we look at observational studies that focus on the mean. What I like about AI and machine learning is it says, no, let's actually try and narrow it down to that patient who you're seeing currently and try to tailor therapies accordingly. So patient-centered care is all about the patient, and I think AI helps us get there to more tailored therapies to that patient rather than treating everybody like the same.
That's great. Mike, the GE healthcare perspective.
Yeah. So before I jump in and kind of give our view of patient-centered care, it probably helps to understand a little bit more about who we are as an organization. So we have four main businesses. What we're most known for is diagnostic imaging. So MRI, CT, big iron scanning machines. We're also in the area of ultrasound. We're in patient care solutions, which is, patient monitoring. You'd see at a bedside in an ICU, anesthesia in the OR. So really across the medical device spectrum. So as we look at patient-centered care, we kind of come at it from three ways, especially when it comes to AI. So AI can be embedded in the actual machine, but AI can also help manage workflow in a department, or it can even, from an enterprise level, really help manage patient flow across a whole organization. And we're all patients. We've all experienced the healthcare system, and we all know that today our system, if we even want to call it a system, is very episodic, and it involves handoffs between silos within the healthcare system. So not only are we focused at the patient level, but we're also talking to clinicians trying to understand what are the barriers around improving diagnosis, quickening diagnosis, and really making diagnosis much more accurate, but also making that patient flow or that diagnosis process or even the treatment design process faster. And so I'll start with kind of a simple example, even just within medical imaging. If we think of a CT machine, this is not future, this is today. So the vast majority of CT machines that we sell in Canada have something called effortless workflow in them. And these are AI tools that actually help clinicians reduce variability between clinicians, exactly what you were talking about. So there's camera positioning systems to make sure that the patient is positioned correctly before the scan begins. And then there are protocols which are actually, based on the size of the patient and the actual characteristics of the patient, how do we dose radiation appropriately, as an example in CT. And so what it really does is tries to reduce that variability that Mohammed was speaking about to make sure that scans are more accurate, faster, and they don't have to be redone. So that's just a simple example of how we approach it. I think the other area, which is really an area we're very focused on, is kind of moving out of that, this machine mindset to a care pathway mindset. So if we think of an oncology patient or a neurology patient, cardiology, there are multiple pieces of equipment and repositories of data which really have to come together to enable patient flow, to enable faster diagnosis. And we're very focused on how do we create more foundational models that bring together multimodal data, whether that's images, whether that's large language models pulling in reporting, dictation, waveform data, if you think of the heart, and even genomic data to allow much more precise diagnosis and faster treatment.
That's great, thank you. Anna, as a Vector faculty member and a researcher at SickKids, we'd love to hear your perspective on this.
Yeah, so, is it on? On? No? Yeah, so just to put things in perspective, one of my roles, in addition to being a professor in computer science and laboratory medicine and pathobiology at U of T and Vector faculty, I actually co-chair the AI and Medicine initiative at SickKids, where we are developing AI for deployment. And so we've been thinking a lot about patient-centered care, and it's been sort of the holy grail of medicine for a while, right? And the question is, what can AI bring? So some of the things that have been mentioned are multimodal data to characterize the patient more holistically. One of the things which I think AI can bring is the data outside of the hospital into the clinical care. So we all, to some extent, either have them at home and forgot to wear them, or wear them, the wearables, right? The watches, the rings, the smart scales, there are all kinds of wearables that you can now wear. And they characterize our state outside of the hospital, something that the clinician will never see. And when we come and we say, this is what's wrong, we don't actually give the full picture of it. We can't, right? And then there is the streaming data, which would be overwhelming to a clinician. So how do we bring in this sort of flow of information that happened leading up to the event that took us to the hospital, took us to the care practitioner, and how do we bring it in a way that they can understand and incorporate that into our personalized sort of treatment care plan. So I think AI has a huge potential in that area. I particularly work in a lot of wearable projects. One thing that it highlights is that there's a lot of heterogeneity among individuals. I think at the hospitals we collect very little data compared to what we can use to characterize a patient, and the more we collect, the more we see how heterogeneous patients are. So in addition to sort of the integration of AI into care pathways, there are some challenges still in AI itself to developing methods that would really take advantage of this heterogeneity and not be hampered by it.
That's wonderful. So as we keep our focus on patient outcomes and that notion of patient-centered care, what are the key characteristics of a opportunity or a project that is ideal for AI development and implementation? How do you select which projects to pursue, and what makes the project ideal in that sense?
I'm happy to start. So some of the projects that we are working on are really driven by the availability of the data. Right now in the hospital, there are some of the departments that are really ready, that have collected the data and are able to share it in a sort of the streaming fashion, and that's where the biggest impact is going to be right now. All of the departments, I think in all of the hospitals, are trying to catch up, but emergency department in particular and critical care are now pretty ripe for AI integration. And the impacts can be varied, right? You can start with operational efficiency. So one of the projects that we have is on developing a predictive tool that says the patient will need this test, right, upon intake. So now the patient has to wait 3-4 hours before the clinician sees the results of the intake and says they need this test, and then they have to wait 3-4 hours to get the test, right? If we had a tool that said you will need this test down the road and do so pretty carefully, then we could reduce the waiting time by half or more. And so this is a project that's almost ready to be deployed at SickKids that I'm working on with clinicians in the emergency department. So it's just one of the examples. Another example in critical care is estimating the risk of deterioration of the patient at all times, sort of seeing whether the patient is deteriorating towards any critical event and signaling that to the clinician and saying, okay, take a look at this patient, maybe something preventative can happen. So that's another sort of project on two different ends of the spectrum that I think we are very, very ripe for.
That's great. So it's very much driven by that perspective around the center of the patient and their needs. Mike, from your perspective.
Sure. So from the industry perspective, often we're working in conjunction with clinicians and other researchers really to understand, start with the patient and then work backwards around where can we lean in to make improvements. So I'm going to use the example of prostate cancer, second leading cause of death among men worldwide, affects 1 in 9 men, so greater than 10% of men will experience prostate cancer in their lifetime. And a key component in the diagnosis of prostate cancer is actually an MRI exam. And for any of you who have ever had an MRI, it can be a pretty intimidating procedure, and it's not uncommon for a patient to have to spend up to an hour in the scanner to get accurate, clear images for accurate diagnosis. And so, you need that sufficient time for data acquisition. Patient needs to remain motionless for these periods of time. And so that was one area which was ripe for, disruption through a deep learning model to actually improve speed, improve image quality, and actually speed up diagnosis. So this is actually, in fact, a made in Canada, developed in Canada technology called AIR Recon DL. It stands for I think it's Advanced Image Reconstruction through Deep Learning. And again, this is another technology which is on pretty well every MRI machine that is sold by GE Healthcare in Canada. And it literally made huge changes to scan times. So scan times more than 50% reduced, which is super important in our healthcare system, which already has long wait times for scans, shortage of imaging technicians and healthcare human resources, so allowing you to get more throughput the quality of the pictures you get, much clearer. So just, there is a great example where starting, what's the problem we're trying to solve, and then how do we bring AI to this to solve that problem. But I think it's important to also say that we're not naive enough to think that we can do this all on our own. And so a big part of our focus as GE Healthcare, we have something called our app orchestrator. And this is, think of it like an app store, but it isn't just iOS on the app store, it's also Android on the app store. And so, and we work with a number of third-party companies to make their AI tools available on a validated platform, which can then serve those up to any number of technologies, whether it's ours or our competitors, so that AI can be embraced and brought into workflows. Because the key part of AI, it's okay if you develop all these little tools, but they've got to be scalable and they've got to be made available so that they can be implemented into workflows. And so App Orchestrator is a big part of our strategy, really, to create a networked ecosystem that isn't just our own apps. They're the apps or AI tools which are being developed across Canada and, for that matter, around the world.
Thank you, Mike. And Mohammed, I know you and your team at Unity Health have dozens of models right now in play. Can you tell us a little bit about how those were selected and prioritized?
Sure. Thank you. Unity Health Toronto, we're a bit unique in that we have 9 strategic pillars and 3 core pillars. We're the only healthcare organization in the country that has said AI is one of those 3 core strategic pillars, which really puts us at a unique position where I have a team of 30 people, and our whole job is to develop and deploy AI solutions into clinical practice. So we have over 50 that we've deployed. So these are not just research models or hypotheticals. These are live running in practice as we speak. And here's how we drive it. I mean, my first set of training is as a clinician. So my mindset is our target audience is the clinician. Everything we do is centered around the patient, though, but it's going to be about clinicians who provide the care or the end users. And we're very clear about our outcomes. So I'll give you a case example. One of our internists came to us a while back, and this is an example I use all the time. So we create something called ChartWatch. His big problem that we focused on was people come to the hospital to not die. Right? And if we ask a patient, I hope you don't mind, we're going to help you not die. I think they'd be okay with that. But the clinicians will come back and they'll say, well, here's the problem that we have. We're not very good at understanding who's going to die or not. In fact, we've actually done a study where we've got over 3,000 clinician predictions, where we went to the floors, and in the moment, we said, you just finished rounding on this patient, you're following them. Do you think they're going to die or go to the ICU? We have over 3,000 clinician predictions. We're able to show that when a physician says, yes, they're going to die or go to the ICU, they're right less than a third of the time. Right? We're just not very good at it. So the clinician comes to us and says, here's my problem. If I knew in advance this patient was going to die or go to the ICU, I could probably help them. How much in advance do you need to know? 48 hours. How often do you want to be alerted? As often as possible, maybe every hour. Great. So we have a solution called ChartWatch, runs every hour on the hour. It's been trained on over 20,000 patients worth of data. And it characterizes patients as low, medium, and high risk, and it predicts if somebody's going to die or go to the ICU. As soon as it reaches a high-risk threshold, it's automated to page the medical team. Medical team has to come and see the patient. Our protocol is within 2 hours of being paged. And there's care pathways. Do you look for signs of sepsis, initiate antibiotics? Do you increase monitoring to every 4 hours? We deployed this in October of 2020, and we submitted a paper for publication now. We're seeing a 26% reduction in mortality, right? Just by aligning that outcome of mortality to what the clinician needs to see and what's important to the patient. We have an intake process that actually outlines what is the problem that you're trying to solve, because you're going to co-create this model with us. It's not just the data scientists go off in modeling. You're going to be at every meeting, and you're going to be fully engaged in that process, because we need to understand your workflow. We need to understand what you're going through. The next section is around, how is AI going to fix this, do you think? How's it going to fit into your workflow? Then we have a whole section on outcomes, and we're very explicit. It's not a free text box. you have choices. Our choices are death, readmission, length of stay, human effort, cost, or other. And if you click other and that's the only box you click, you're automatically deprioritized. Because we want to focus on the outcomes that matter to people, matter to the healthcare system.
It's wonderful to hear that there's that level of rigor and from a relatively simple notion of just embedding AI into your systems and services. So we've heard a lot about these areas of high impact. And as we look to the future, the next 5 to 10 years, what are the areas where you are most excited about the potential for AI to drive improvement in the health system? Mohammed, why don't we start with you?
Sure, I think Anna alluded to this. I'm very keen on multimodal data. Because if you think about how people work, the whole concept around AI is this artificial intelligence, right? Well, what do we consider not artificial intelligence? It's probably us, right? We would hope. Well, how do we actually work in healthcare? And if you're sitting there with a patient, or if you're a patient yourself, I'd want to know, as I'm talking to this patient, I want to be able to listen to the patient. I want to notice changes in their tone. I want to know when they're angry. Can the AI listen to us? Not really right now. I mean, yeah, there's AI scribes and there's digital scribe tools and such that can listen. But I also want to know, as I'm talking to the person, I'm seeing this little tremor in their finger. It's kind of indicative of a neurological condition. Am I able to see that? Was there a video camera in my office? Most offices don't have that. When you actually go and do a percussion, or do you actually like test their knee, or that you listen to the rails in their lungs? Am I able to listen through AI? We haven't really done that yet either, right? So it's kind of an unfair fight, because we're saying as a clinician, I have access to my 5 senses. And historically, how did we diagnose diabetes? We tasted urine. We could actually taste the urine to see if you have diabetes, right? I don't think we do that anymore, so taste may not be one of the senses. But we have all these senses that we use. But AI right now is crippled because we don't use all of those modalities of data input. Imagine if we could. That's going to make AI incredibly powerful.
It's a very exciting prospect. Mike, from your perspective?
Well, I think there's a common theme here around multimodal data. I personally, and I think we as a company, believe we are at a tipping point in healthcare where, medical breakthroughs and technological breakthroughs are coming together. And we're going to see an advance in the next 10 years in healthcare that we have probably not seen in the past 100 years. So I have some American data. Unfortunately, I don't have Canadian data. But the average American hospital each year produces 50 petabytes of data. And just to put that in perspective, what's 1 petabyte of data? Because I'm not a technical guy, so I need to kind of have a mental picture. So if you took 4,000 digital images every day for the average lifetime of a human being, that would produce 1 petabyte of data. So the average US hospital produces 50 petabytes of data a year. 90% of that data sits unused. It's sitting in EMRs. It is, it's waveform data. It's all of these different modes of data that we've talked about. And the vast majority of it is collected, but actually not used in the treatment of the patient. And part of it is, as a physician, how do you possibly take all that information in, sift and sort it? And that's where the promise of AI and some of these foundational models which pull stuff together and actually begin to predict and point out, really be that co-pilot to the clinician around where they need to be focused. And so, I don't know how many of you remember the movie Minority Report. It was over 20 years ago, starring Tom Cruise. But the whole concept was, it was about a specialized police force who predicted when a crime was about to happen, and then they would go and, prevent the crime from happening or arrest the person before the crime happened. So we are going to see that in disease states like cancer, where, today we use imaging to, mammography to detect lesions which will become cancerous. Well, already MIT has created an open source model that will predict, this patient will develop cancer within the next 5 years. And so, we talk about the next 10 years. This is not 10 years out. This is probably 3 to 5 years out. So it's a very exciting time. It's going to take a village, all of us working together to make sure that we optimize and take advantage of what's available. But super exciting time.
Thank you, Mike. Anna?
I'd like to pick up on the last theme. I think the biggest impact from AI will be preventative in healthcare, right? We want to create a model for a person that is the baseline for themselves and trigger maybe an alarm, maybe just a suggestion to do something minimally invasive to avert a disaster down the line. I think we talk about healthcare, but it's not. It's sick care is what we have now. We really want healthcare. We want our health to be front and center and not having had deteriorated by the time we see a practitioner. We don't want it to be reactive anymore. We want it to be proactive. And I think a lot of things have to change. Mohammed is absolutely right. What data are we not collecting to achieve that state? We really need to be collecting more data, but then sort of the ethics part of it kicks in, right? Are we going to be in Orwellian mode once we collect all this data? Who is listening? How is that data being used? And it's already been discussed that clinicians find it incredibly burdensome to be listened to all the time. Yes, it brings in ambient scribes everybody loves because it sort of saves a lot of time and the clinician can spend more time with the patient. But also, apparently, Microsoft Copilot, you can just summarize who made the biggest mistake in this previous discussion, and it can give you some suggestions. And so this also can happen. And so we are at the precipice of an enormous potential of AI being integrated into care, and we need to be very conscientious about how do we integrate it in a way that really the health is perpetuated both for patients and clinicians, and our sort of the care providers are not really slighted by this, but the whole industry can improve and move forward. I think prevention is the key, how we prevent, and the societal discussion around that so that it actually is most impactful is still ongoing, and I think everybody should be involved in that.
Thank you very much, Anna. So a lot of food for thought here today. I hope everyone found this as inspiring as I did. And thank you all for sharing your time, your knowledge with us. We know that the future of healthcare is in good hands with leadership like yours at the helm of this. So thank you all very much.